Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping straight into uncovering the clinical and biblical path to breaking the destructive cycle of shame. I know, it's a super heavy topic, but as we dig into the source material, I promise you, it's also an incredibly hopeful one. Let's get right to it. Think about the massive psychological gap between saying, "I did wrong," versus internalizing, "I am wrong." It's a huge difference, right? That contrast perfectly sets up the heavy weight we're unpacking today. The whole difference between guilt and shame really boils down to that single defining shift in perspective.
Because shame isn't just feeling a little bad about yourself. It acts as this crushing, overriding, dominant force. It literally tries to dictate your life, backing you into a corner and totally blinding you to any possible path forward.
To really get a grip on this, we need to clearly define what we're talking about. Based on both clinical and biblical sources, shame is defined as a painful emotion caused by an awareness of failure. But here's the kicker. It results in a paralyzing conviction. It's the absolute belief that you are entirely worthless, unacceptable, and completely deserving a rejection from others and even from God. Now here is the absolute crucial difference you need to catch. Guilt is actually a healthy conviction. It promotes choice and change by flagging our missteps so we can course correct. Shame, on the flip side, is just pure unhealthy condemnation, whether that's coming from yourself or from others. The text emphasized that the goal isn't to live trapped in shame, but to respond to guilt and keep moving forward.
And this brings us to a really clear thematic progression. The journey out of shame and into healing actually follows 6 distinct phases. We start with the origin, phase 1, sin. That triggers phase 2, silence. Then, beautifully, we see phase 3, seeking. This opens the door for phase 4, salvation, leading to phase 5, solace, and finally equipping us for phase 6, everyday stewardship. So, with that core definition and our roadmap laid out, we really have to ask ourselves, how exactly does this paralyzing emotion show up in our day-to-day lives? Like, what are the actual devastating effects of shame when it really takes root? Well, the immediate go-to reflex is silence. Shame is just so incredibly complex and painful that our primary defense mechanism is to run and hide. We literally silence our voices and hide our true selves, all just to avoid exposing the root cause of our pain and risking even more rejection. It's a completely destructive cycle. We actually see this hiding reflex beautifully mapped out in Scripture in 2 very different but equally tragic ways. You've got Adam and Eve, who felt the shame of their sin and literally, physically hid behind bushes in the Garden of Eden. And then on the flip side, you have the Samaritan woman in John 4. She hid socially. She intentionally chose to fetch her water at the blazing, scorching hour of noon just to avoid the town's community and the other women. Whether it's physical or social, the hiding is exactly the same.
But what about today? Well, in modern clinical practice, this silence morphs into some very specific avoidance behaviors. When we refuse to speak about our shame, it turns into things like addictions, obsessive overworking, exhausting image management, complete social withdrawal, or just totally failing to communicate our basic needs. These are, essentially, the modern-day bushes we hide behind and that keep us totally emotionally stuck.
Now, hold on, because this is a massive point. Shame isn't always caused by your own actions. Sometimes it's entirely forced upon you. When someone else sins against you and it goes totally unaddressed, it creates deep betrayal trauma. You end up carrying this profound, crushing weight of shame, even though you were the victim of somebody else's failure. The tragic biblical story of Tamar captures this betrayal trauma perfectly. She was manipulated and raped by her own brother Amnon. But look at her response. Even amidst that immense betrayal, she righteously protested, wearing a long virgin robe to declare she would not just quietly live in shame. Her story shows the utter devastation of betrayal, for sure, but it also highlights God's provision. Her other brother, Absalom, stepped in to care for her, ensuring that public shame would absolutely not be the final word on her life. Okay, so knowing that our natural reflex, whether it's from our own mistakes or the sins of someone else, is to just retreat into total silence, we have to ask, what is God's proactive reflex toward his shamed children?
Instead of letting shame win, the biblical narrative shows God actually going on a gracious, gentle offensive. His direct response to our silence is seeking. He actively pursues us when we are hiding and initiates non-condemning conversations. He literally steps right into the silence.
And the contrast here is just mind-blowing. God doesn't immediately kick the door down with a condemning interrogation. Think about it. In Genesis, he gently asks Adam, "Where are you?" He didn't lose them. He asked a question to start a dialogue. Or in John 4, Jesus doesn't point out the Samaritan woman's sins right away. He casually chats with her about customs and history. He uses gentle conversation to establish safety and break that agonizing grip of silence.
So once that silence is finally broken through this gentle pursuit and a safe space is created, we arrive at the pivotal moment. What is the ultimate, lasting cure for this paralyzing condition? According to these sources, the absolute ultimate antidote is profound surrender and salvation. Processing shame means you have to stop hiding, confess the reality of the situation, and accept what the text calls God's unearned grace. From the innocent sacrifices providing a covering in the Garden of Eden to Christ being the ultimate covering on the cross, true healing comes from surrendering to restorative love.
And surrendering brings us to a beautiful state of solace, a profound, deep-seated peace. Now, let's be real. Solace doesn't magically erase life's struggles or wipe away the consequences of the past, but it provides the absolute assurance that you are no longer dominated or defined by shame. That paralyzing grip, it's gone.
Just listen to this quote from Psalm 34:5. It serves as such a powerful anchor for our minds. It says, "Those who look to him for help will be radiant with joy. No shadow of shame will darken their faces." Shame actively feeds on fear and thrives in the shadows. But this promises that looking to God brings a radiant joy that entirely displaces that darkness. So, we've seen the path out of the shadows and into solace. But how does this actually translate into the real world? How do we actively live after shame in our day-to-day, walking around lives?
While it comes down to stewardship and faithfulness, healing isn't some one-time magic trick, it's an active, ongoing process. Just like Adam and Eve had to cultivate the land, or the Samaritan woman had to navigate her town after meeting Jesus, we have to exercise our God-given dominion. We must actively guard our hearts against the things that can pull us backward into those old, shameful patterns.
To do that, the material outlines 5 practical skills for faithful stewardship. 1. Active worship. 2. Intentional community engagement. 3. A regular rhythm of confession. 4. Diligent laboring and praying. And 5. Proper self-care. Because shame usually develops in the context of our environment, we have to purposefully pursue our healing in a new context of healthy learning and community.
Now, if you're a counselor or a caregiver watching this explainer, here are your essential guidelines for walking alongside someone in this process. First, accept and respect their experience. Build safety through gentle conversation before you ever offer solutions. Evaluate for co-occurring issues like anxiety or PTSD. Consistently provide hope from the Word, and crucially, make sure you connect them to a supportive community where they can actually thrive.
I'll leave you with this final, provocative thought to reflect on today. If the Creator is actively, graciously pursuing your healing, and He's gently seeking you out right now in the very midst of your silence, what is keeping you from joining the conversation? What steps can you take today to finally step out of the shadows? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this brings clarity and hope to your journey.